You're listening to the Autism Weekly podcast. Each week, we share community voices and bring light to stories that increase awareness, acceptance, equity, access, and inclusion. If you haven't already, subscribe to join the Autism Weekly family. I'm your host, Jeff Skibitsky. This week, we're joined by Stacey Hoaglund, advocate, disability consultant, and president of the Autism Society of Florida. With over 25 years of experience in advocacy and community collaboration, Stacey has led efforts in education, inclusion, and legislative change. She's the editor of the Autism Notebook Magazine and author of Go for the Goal, A Parent's Guide to Creating Meaningful IEP Goals. Today, Stacey joins us to discuss the critical link between autism and drowning risks, sharing prevention strategies, layers of protection, and how advocacy can help save lives. Welcome to the podcast, Stacey Hoaglund.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's thrilled to be here.
Well, it's my pleasure. And as you and I have discussed, this is a topic that, unfortunately, I don't think everybody has in the forefront of their mind until probably they're in a crisis, or they hear about a crisis, or they read one in the news. But before we get into that, can you give us a little bit of a background about what led you to start advocating about drowning, and especially as it relates to autistic folks?
Well, it was kind of interesting because, unfortunately, drowning in children with autism has been around forever, right? Forever. And it happened to be about 10 years ago. It happened just to be making the news more and more. I think it was really part of like the whole social media explosion as well. So, we had more access to information just in general. So I think we started to hear more and more about it. And I was actually on a train going from Washington to New York with my son. We were there as part of a large group of people that were doing something called the Day in the Hill. We go to Washington and we talk to legislators. And so as a reward, we were going to reward ourselves with a trip to New York. So we're sitting on the train, and on the train, there was a television set, and it was probably CNN was playing. And it was another drowning death of a child with autism from Florida. And it was making the national news. And I sat there and looking at it, and I'm like, why isn't anybody doing something? Because I was thinking, I was kind of stuck inside my education box, very passionate about make sure the kids get what they need in school and inclusive education and all that good stuff. And I hadn't really thought that much about drowning and water safety. And I thought, who's doing something? So when I got home, I called a friend of mine who's a lobbyist, and I said, who's working on this? And he goes, I don't know anybody from the disability community that's working on it, but there's this group that meets that talks about water safety and drowning prevention. So he introduced me to some truly amazing women. These are two moms who lost children to drowning, and were working for the Department of Health at the time. And their passion just poured over into those who were trying to make a difference. And so I got in there with them, and it was interesting because one of the moms was a younger mom. And as I'm talking about, the autism community and why we have concerns, she was quiet, and she kind of looked down for a minute. And in my head, I thought, uh-oh, it's coming. I could see it on her. I could see myself in her. And so she looks up and she says, would you do me a favor and describe autism to me? So I said, sure. And I explained what a young child with autism generally, what we see. And she says, you know what? I think my son had autism, because what you described is exactly what he was like. And he just wandered out of the house one day and he died in our backyard pool. And that is how so many because most children in this country that die from drowning, they're the little ones. They're the 3-year-olds and younger. And those of us who live and breathe inside the autism community, we know that, well, even CDC will tell us that the average age of diagnosis is still 4.5, even though that makes me a little crazy. So how many of these babies are we losing that we don't yet know have autism, but yet the connection with the wandering and the elopement, getting out of the home undetected, can take their life. So that's really where I thought, okay, nobody else seems to be doing anything. Since then, we have lots of wonderful organizations that are really trying to actively engage and make a difference. And I believe that when we look at data for children, all children, the more I look at it, the more I believe that most children who die from drowning are on the autism spectrum, whether they're yet recognized or not. But if we look at the kids and the description of what they were like before they died, it wouldn't be a stretch.
Yeah, I mean, it almost, just as a parent myself, and just thinking about those risks, it's almost like, I don't necessarily need the autistic identity or the label. There's probably some core characteristics that we all should be aware of that are going to be able to create more of a risk scenario. Automatically coming to mind is, like you said, somebody who might elope. Is that if you do live in Florida, there's a lot of wetlands. Eloping into those areas it's very dangerous. Those who might have a repetitive interest or a very stereotypical sort of desire to be a part of water, or sensations of visual where they're seeing splashes, or I mean, those are kids that are going to get too close to a pool at times and might not understand the risk. Are there specific things that you're seeing for the autistic population that are red flags to say, I need to start thinking prevention early?
Yeah, well, I mean, we want, of course, everyone who is a parent, no matter if your child has a diagnosis or they don't, you need to be aware of drowning prevention. The 4 top states across our country when it comes to drowning is Florida, Texas, Arizona, and California. And if we look at what's in common, really it's the weather, right? We tend to have better weather, which kind of means that we can swim year round, right? Recreationally. And so just in Florida, so Florida and Texas right now have the highest numbers for 2024, so this past year, when it comes to drowning. Florida has 1.6 million swimming pools. And then, of course, from really even where I'm sitting right now, I have a lake about 100 yards that way. I got a canal about 50 yards that way. I have the ocean a couple miles away, and I have a swimming pool about 12 feet out this back door. So that my scenario where I am is extremely common throughout, people who live in the state of Florida. And so if we, Florida tends to do an okay job, not a great one. We are getting better when it comes to tracking and data gathering when it comes to looking at drowning and drowning prevention. And so the Department of Children and Families here, they tend to be our go-to when it comes to numbers. There's some issues there that we're dealing with internally on getting better at that, but it's pretty good, and it's pretty when a child dies, usually you'll see within about 48 to 36 hours, or 36 to 48 hours, you're going to see it documented there, which is open for the public to see. In the 105 children that we lost in 2024, which is an enormous number, almost all of them, what it says, because there's a little blurb there and it will describe to you what happened. In almost all of them, it says the child got out of the home undetected. And when you are a parent of a child with autism, you know the drill. And it's interesting because there's some data that has been gathered by the NAA, the National Autism Association. They're really good at things that are related to health, safety, and stuff like that. So they have a research project that they did that says that 48% of children with autism have experience with wandering away from safety. While I greatly appreciate that we have that figure, I actually don't know a parent of a child with autism, not one, that hasn't had that moment, whether it's in your grocery store or your Home Depot or your Walmart or your park or your home, whatever, and you turn and they're not where you thought they were or where you last saw them. Much of that is because, they're kind of self-directed. It doesn't really cross their mind to be like, oh, Mom, Dad, I'm going to go over here. Okay, so I'll be back. If they want to go check something out, they go check something out. And so that is one of the reasons why we need to, like you mentioned before, those layers of protection, because we can't keep our eyes on our kids all the time. We got to make dinner. We got to do our laundry. We got to take care of our home, other children in the house. So there's other things that have to be done, but we need to set up other means of keeping our kids safe. And because, again, these kids are generally not going to be kids that are going to let you know that they're going to go outside. And you also mentioned about their propensity to water. When my son was little, we had a boat, and there's actually no quantifying what actually went off the side of the boat, because once it's gone, we would look around and go, "What did he just throw off the side of the boat?" Because he would be hanging his little body over the side, of course, with a life vest on,
Hmm.
and grab whatever he could just to go like this and watch whatever it was hit and splash, because what the water does, nothing else does. There's no
Hmm.
other type of experience that you can have that's going to have that immediate response. Because, right, if you're somebody who's looking for, you know, something to immediately happen, water is fabulous for that, because it's
Hmm.
going to give you that. And plus, the way it feels, the way it looks, the way the light hits it, and all that really cool sensory stuff, there's really nothing else like water. And for a person that either doesn't have any or has very limited knowledge, wisdom, experience with what's dangerous, if
Hmm.
you don't really know that something is dangerous. And if the day before they were in the pool with mom and dad and they were having a great time, the splashing, the laughing, just everything, it may not even cross their mind that they wouldn't have that same experience when they're out there by themselves and
Yeah.
there's nobody else around.
Yeah, and that problem solving skill and the ability to be able to understand, like you said, safety awareness and to put to a delay to gratification and manage those impulses. Those are all things that are learned over time. And it's things that you don't always expect from a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, especially those who are neurodiverse and learning slightly differently through the process. Those are hard skills to learn and adapt to. So, I mean, obviously, as for most parents who know that their children are going to be near water, they're going to want to teach them to swim, but that's not always immediately practical. And it doesn't stop that other component of what are they going to do at the moment? Are they going to make a choice where they then are in a flowing water or in a murky pond where, it's not as reliable and consistent, even if they know to swim? So, what are some of these layers of protection or you know safety bubbles that you can kind of have for that child while they're in the process of developing some of these more complex or reasoning skills that can help a family feel more confident, whether that's trackers or whether what other things are out there?
Well, definitely the biggest thing that we find just in general with parents is that no one ever thinks it can happen to them, right? So that is like the kiss of death, like literally. So you can't, unfortunately, you can't think that way, because especially if you have a kid who really seeks to be independent and really wants to go off and try new things on their own, you can't do that. You have to, unfortunately, you have to kind of assume that they're going to be Houdinis, because many of them are, and that's definitely inside the autism community. You cannot underestimate your kid. I don't care what a school has told you their IQ is from an IQ test. You should never go by that. I have seen kids that, particularly schools, grossly underestimate a student, and that kid hacks into their school, computer system and does like amazing stuff. So you just can't ever think that if you have a lock on the door that your kid's not going to figure out how to get out that lock, undo that lock and
Hmm.
get out the door. They are very creative, very insightful. They are really good imitators. So even if you think they're not paying attention, you should never make that assumption. So for one, yes, we definitely want to make sure that children have swimming lessons. Um, and I can speak. I'm a parent of, he's now an adult with autism, and I have to be honest, I would probably say that yes, we did get swimming lessons very early on for both him and his brother, but that actually was probably more because we had a boat.
Hmm.
If I hadn't had a boat, I wasn't living, in a space that had water close by, didn't have a pool at the time. So, since children with autism don't come with a manual, all of us are just starting from zero, right? We're trying to figure out what to do. And when we have a kid, especially if they've just been well, not even. So if they've been diagnosed, yes, but also if they don't even yet have a diagnosis, but they're not communicating,
Hmm.
what's going to be our focus? It's going to be on speech therapy, right? It's going to be on getting them to be able to follow instruction and to be able to let you know when something hurts or to tell you that they love you. That's where your time, your energy, your money is going to go. And, the whole swimming thing, oh yeah, that's really nice and sweet and cute. And we'll get to that. But I encourage all of your listeners to really put that on the front burner versus the back.
Yeah.
I have talked to many parents who have lost children to drowning, but both lost because there's something that inside the water safety community, they call it fatal and non-fatal. And so, of course, fatal are the kids who die from drowning. So the non-fatals, those are the kids who experienced a drowning. So it's still considered a drowning, but they survived, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some of those kids, I mean, they end up with lifelong additional disabilities in addition to if they have autism.
Mm-hmm.
So it could go, the experience that they had could end up affecting them for as long as they're alive, which could be a long time.
Yeah.
And the data tells us that it's about an 8-to-1 ratio. So for every one who dies from drowning, about 8 kids experience it, but yet don't die from it. So that's where, one of the other things that we do at the Autism Society, we work in conjunction with, which is one of the layers of protection. We work in conjunction with our Fire Chiefs Association. Every state has them. And so we work with them and they provide CPR classes to our families. And within those CPR classes, yes, they teach them CPR, but they also talk to them about other emergencies. Like if your kid is choking, what do you do? And just all those emergency responses. So we definitely want to have door alarms on your doors, especially if you have like those back door sliding glass doors. And, some of them, like everybody should check your sliding glass doors. If you could take 2 fingers and you could slide that door, then your 2-year-old can get out that door. So it depends on, how easily it slides and everything. You definitely, if as far as locks go, you can have a pin up at the very top of the door. But again, don't make the assumption that your kid isn't going to pull a chair or something over and pull that pin out. That's why I really want you to have door alarms. And the door alarm needs to be one that continues to buzz. Even after the door goes back and shuts, because the kid may go outside and shut the door. So then the alarm goes off and you're on the other side of the house. So you don't even know that the door opened. So it really needs to be one that continues. Once it's set off, it stays on until you come and you push the button and you reset it. So you want that. If you have a pool in the backyard, having some type of fencing around the pool with a gate that is a self-locking or self-latching lock on the gate. There's also, I have some families who use their alarms that float in the pool. So if something disturbs the water, the alarm goes off.
That's amazing.
They've been pretty happy with those. And then, yes, there's kids who use trackers. So there's different types of trackers. There's one that an organization called Angel Sense has, where you could literally set up on your phone a geofence. So if your kid goes out the front door, the back door, whatever, and you have the fence kind of set up that it's your home, you will immediately get notified on your phone. And, especially today's young parents, you guys are growing up with the phone. So we kind of expect the phone to be always with you because that's your generation.
Yep.
And so that something like that is also helpful. I even have some families that use like just Apple AirTags on their kids so that they know where their kids are. And that's both kids with and without disabilities. So there are many different options out there when it comes to different tracking devices. People can easily do a Google search for those and find the one that matches up with them the easiest. But definitely, making sure that, the one other thing I want to mention, we don't lose a lot of kids this way, but we sadly do. And some people are probably going to be shocked by this. We have situations where children drown in the pool with people around. So there's people, it's a party, people are drinking, eating, talking, socializing, and nobody's paying attention to the kids in the pool. And a kid dies. So we have something like we actually have make these tags. And so at a party, the person wears it. It's on a lanyard around your neck, and you are the water watcher. You're the designated water watcher. So during parties and festivities, making sure that, and it might be just 15 minutes, you guys take turns. Okay, you're the water watcher for these 15 minutes, and then you're going to do it the next, so that somebody is always monitoring what's going on in the pool, in the lake, and wherever body of water you are. Because, we all get kind of sidetracked and pay attention to different things. And, up to 35 to 40% of people with autism have experienced a seizure during their life. Some of them, like my son, actually has epilepsy. It started when he was a teenager. So when he was young and we were doing the whole swimming thing, he did not. So his first one happened when he was 17. And they were very significant for a while. So we are very afraid of water in my house, because if he's in the water, and he's an amazing swimmer, but if he's in the water, I mean, he could die just like that. So being aware of that as well, and why we need water watchers and people that really have their eyes on the kids when they're in the water.
I mean, having that healthy fear, it's good. It's good to consciously be aware that all it takes is 1 minute. You don't have to live every second of your life with that fear, but it's just knowing that, I need to be conscientious about how I set up my environment. I need to know what might be a risk within my environment, and I'm protecting for that, for anything that my child can't do on their own.
Well, let me just add one more thing. The other place that is truly devastating is the bathtub.
Mm-hmm.
Every single year in Florida, we lose a couple kids, not a lot, but because someone left their kids in the bathtub, and maybe they went to check maybe, I don't know, Amazon knocked at the front door. Maybe the phone rang. Maybe they went to get their phone. There's all types of, or maybe they just left and they thought the kids were fine because it's a bathtub. Children can drown in 2 inches of water. So don't ever leave your children in the bathtub without you sitting right there.
Yeah. And I mean, and you've been around this, you've heard the stories, you've been integrated into the lives of those who maybe have had these horrific experiences. Just even the data that you just gave, knowing that 8 to 1 is the non-fatal to fatal, and how much of a quality of life change those non-fatal drownings potentially could be causing for not just the person who went through the drowning, but their family and everybody involved, is that it changes so many different dynamics. One of the things that I always find interesting is that, we have all of these cameras that we set up to protect from somebody stealing a package, or who's coming across my sidewalk. Is it my neighbor, or is it somebody I don't feel comfortable? Like, we have all this out there. It's become more affordable. And it's almost getting that ready planning beforehand, but you have to be aware first. Part of that is how is the community teaching these concepts, or making that you should be thinking of these as a new parent. What's the funding? What's the resources? Have you been involved in any of the legislative components that have added to that experience for families?
Yeah, so the Autism Society of Florida, one of our biggest arms of advocacy is legislative advocacy. So we have, like, this year, our legislative session here in our state is 60 days a year. So we have a session every year. Not every state does, but we have one every year. And so one of the 4 items that we're going to be working on is related to drowning prevention. We see it as a public health crisis, because even if you look at COVID numbers, I mean, we're losing more children to drowning. And so it's a massive issue. I was part of, I guess it was about 2 years ago that we created the final, it's about a year ago, I guess, we created the final plan. But the first time ever, there is a U.S. National Water Safety Action Plan. It's a mouthful. And so finally, because this is something new for our country, but Australia has done an excellent job at decreasing their drowning rates there. Parts of the UK and Japan and other industrialized type of countries are really taking a hard look at their drowning rates and trying to do something as a country. So we finally have our action plan. And so now what's happening is each of the states now are expected to put their own statewide plan together. But it was interesting because during all those meetings that we had, many of the people participating were doctors, researchers, really analytical minded people. And one of the big deficits that we found was in data. We just don't have the accurate data. So when we talk about the fatals to non-fatals, that 8-to-1, that's like what you call a good guess, right? Because we don't have good data on that. And even in Florida, when we talk about that, there's the 105 children who died last year. Those are only children that were reported to the Department of Children and Families through what's called an abuse hotline. So it's basically abuse and neglect. And so that doesn't capture all children. That just captures those who went through there. So we know we have to kind of get better with that. But when we talk about legislative, we would really like to see not just state by state, but we would really like as a nation, for our nation to look at this, Congress to look at this as a public health crisis. So we're kind of moving in that direction. We did last year in our state, we were able to get an appropriation. It wasn't near as what it needs to be. It was $500,000. But it was children under the age of 4, and it was for children who met a certain economic criteria. And so we want all this instruction to be available to anyone, because I kind of go back. If you're a parent and you have a kid with autism and you're sinking all your resources into speech therapy, behavior therapy, and all that kind of stuff, you may be kind of tapped out. And you're really looking at the whole swimming thing. So we don't really want that to be a blockage. One of the other things that our organization does a lot, and we just don't do that here. I'm actually, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be in Atlantic Beach. We do Atlantic City. We do presentations at water safety conferences across the U.S. And we train water safety instructors on how to teach kids with autism. Now, we're not teaching them how to teach kids how to swim, because they are swim instructors. So that side of it, they know. But as far as being able to work with our children, knowing how to communicate with them, how to read what their body language is telling you, how to prime them before they get to a swimming lesson where there might be whistles blowing and too many kids in the pool, and how to set up your environment for the best possible outcome if what we're hoping to do is teach a kid how to swim. So we train thousands of water safety instructors, both here in our state and across the U.S. So we continue to work on that.
And it's so needed. I mean, in my mind always goes to, it takes a village. So it's taking a whole variety of resources. One of the common touch points for most young families is their pediatrician, or if they have a child who identifies autistic, it could potentially be their behavioral health team. It could be something like that. Where are those resources? Because I would imagine those touch points could be, hey, these are risk factors that you might not be thinking about that I should immediately be addressing and drawing attention to. Are those teams being collaborated with as well?
They are, and I will say that there's a bit of resistance. So any of your audience members who are parents of kids with autism, I would bet that most of you guys had the same experience I did, and meeting those early years. You something is up, right? Something's up. You don't know why your kid's doing what they're doing or not doing what you think they should be doing. So you go to your pediatrician. Pediatrician says, "Oh, give him more time. He's a boy. Don't compare it to a sibling. Oh, just give a little bit more time." And, I heard that 26 years ago, and people are still hearing it today. So, we have been advocating for a long time, our organization, on pediatricians, and really pushing them really to start, even if you don't have to tell the parent there's a the big A word. What you can say is, yeah, you know what, I did the screening and they're not making as much progress as I would hope that they'd make. So I'm going to refer you on. Just refer them on to other people who can do additional screenings. Really, that's what we're looking for. So we've been working with the American Academy of Pediatrics on that, but it is a slow moving wheel. And we find the same thing when it comes to drowning. I was speaking at a conference a couple years ago. I think it was in Colorado. And there was a mom in the audience, and there was a pretty big deal from the American Academy of Pediatrics there. He was standing at the front of the room, and there was a mom in the room who had a daughter who had Down syndrome. And she said her daughter had died, and she was in a pool. And this is really tragic. She was in a pool for swimming lessons, and she died in the pool getting swimming lessons because they put too many kids in the water at one time. And the mom did not know. She didn't really understand the dynamics of what she needed because, again, her kid didn't come with a manual. So she really wasn't sure what should the dynamic look like here in a swimming lesson. What should I look for in a swim instructor for my daughter? Because she's got some pretty complex needs. And so the staff was not trained. The mom didn't understand. So the mom said to this guy from American Academy of Pediatrics, my pediatrician never told me, never gave me a heads up about drowning prevention, didn't talk to me about it, didn't talk to me about, because her kid also was a wanderer, never talked to me about wandering, never talked to me about what I should look for in a swim instructor. And his response was, we have a lot of stuff that we have to talk to parents about when they come in for their well baby visits, and we can't get to everything. And it was just heartbreaking. And so I went over to the mom, and I talked to her, and she was just very frustrated. But I told her, I encouraged her to be able to spread her story, to share her story with others, to make sure that other parents know that sometimes it requires us, just like with me, I had to go to my pediatrician and go, okay, I'm not taking that anymore. So I need you to send me on to somebody else. Who are you going to send me to? Because this wait and see stuff is not working. And unfortunately, people need, and it's sad for me to say this as a parent, as an advocate, but we have to push. We just do.
Yeah.
When we sit and we wait for somebody else to come over with this silver platter and tell us all the stuff that we're going to need to know, you're going to be waiting a really long time. So being able to, ideally, your pediatrician would say, okay, you know what, I have some concerns developmentally, so I'm going to send you on to this other person who's going to do the screening or whatever. And you know what, there's a huge connection to wandering and drowning. So I want to make sure that you get this information. So I'm going to connect you, I don't know, it could be the local Red Cross, other organizations in your area. So that is what we would love for them to get to. Something that we're working on in Florida right now. So it's part of legislative stuff that we're working on this year. When in our state presently, when you sign your kid up for subsidized childcare, so let's say, I know, for a 2 or 3 year old, right? You're going to put them in because you have to go to work. So they're going to be in childcare. You have to sign a paper that there's 2, that you understand road rage, which I thought was kind of interesting. So you have to sign a paper that gives you some information about road rage. And there's another one that you understand about the flu. So it's not a COVID specific thing, but it's just about the flu in general. So you have to sign these things. And so we want the same thing. We want something that a parent then will get information. So you're going to sign this. We're going to give you information about drowning prevention. So hopefully it will instill some information that, especially for the connection to wandering, because that is not just an autism thing. 2, 3, 4-year-olds, they're babies, right? They want to experience things. They want to go look for stuff. And so we really want all of these parents to know that when you have that kid who's inquisitive and wanders away, there is nothing that's going to prevent them from wanting to get to something that looks really cool, that they've had a great experience in before. And because, they're going to naturally think that it's going to be really fun when I jump in and then I use my little arms and I scooch over to the side. And you kind of alluded to it before with the whole, rivers, lakes, canals, especially if you live in a metropolitan area and you have a lake in your backyard, that lake was probably dug to build your home. Mm-hmm. So basically it's dug, not like a beach where it has this nice little grade in it, right? No, you're at the edge. And when you step in, you go down 10 to 15 feet. That's how they're made. And there's no little side for you to grip onto either. So if you're a little kid and you go in that water, it's going to be very difficult to be able to look at the shore and even if you're a swimmer, look at the shore and size up, where am I most likely to be able to grab onto something to pull myself out of that water?
Yeah. And I mean, and I guess I would always appeal to my clinical colleagues out there in the fact that one of the most important things you can do for a family is help them to be able to identify risks, doing those risk assessments, pairing them up to those behaviors, pairing them up to the skills. Is that if you have to take a step back from some communication goals in order to set up an environment where somebody is more safe and more aware, that's what you should be doing. I mean, that's kind of looking at the right clinical decision making. And I think that has to be a priority through it. And hopefully your conversations and your advocacy around this will open up a variety of different eyes to say, not just to the family member, but to all the support networks around them, that let's have this conversation. Let's push forward. So how can somebody get more involved like you did, where you took your passion and you said, I need to make sure more and more people have this information out there and that they can benefit from all the research I'm doing and all the work I'm doing. How can others get involved in advocacy work like that?
Well, if you're specifically interested in drowning prevention, like I said before, there's this U.S. National Water Safety Action Plan, and every state is going to have its own plan. So no matter where you live in the U.S., your state's going to have a plan. Those are the committees that are meeting. They're open. So you can contact, your Department of Health, really, they are part of all 50 of those that are happening. So you can contact your state Department of Health. If you live in a metropolitan area, you can contact them, because sometimes, like even in our state, the places like Central Florida, actually, the home of Disney World, they tend to have a large amount of drowning in that particular part of the state. And a part of it is due to, people coming from out of state. So you could come from Kansas, where you don't really have a whole lot of water around, and you're visiting at an Airbnb that's got a pool and a lake in the back, and you're not prepared. You're not paying attention. You don't know that you need to pay attention. And so we have been working with we have an organization here in the state that is, anyway, it's your Airbnbs, it's your Verbos, it's your vacation home, vacation rentals. So your vacation rentals, we've been working with the organization that oversees our vacation rentals here in the state to hopefully, so if I'm a homeowner and I'm going to Airbnb out my home, in my little packet that I have when people come to visit my home, I'm going to have some information there about safety. There's going to be door alarms on the doors. I'm going to let you know, because you're in my home now, that you need to monitor your children because there's a pool in the backyard, there's a lake, or there's a lake down the street, or whatever it might be. Just last year, we lost around 10 children in this state that were not from Florida. They died here in Florida. They weren't here. They weren't from Florida.
Mm-hmm.
So people need to be aware of that. Just because you're thinking, I don't live by water. Our state is a big vacation state. So if you vacation in Florida, you're going to be around water. And it doesn't matter where you go in the state, you're going to be around water. So Central Florida does lose, larger than the rest of us. They tend to lose between 35 and 40% of our total is from Central Florida.
Yeah, and I would imagine the last thing that folks there would ever want to do is to have people visiting or those who are coming to enjoy their part of Florida who are ill-informed, don't understand the safety dangers, and have to experience something that they could have learned from, like you're saying, by having this added material when they come to visit. But Stacey, I appreciate you giving us your time today, the information that you were able to share, and all the advocacy you're doing around this subject. I think that it's a very important topic that maybe doesn't get enough airplay, and I'm glad that we had this conversation today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, because it's, information is power, and we all need to be aware. And, it's always better to know and be prepared than to get to a dark space where you can look back and say, I wish I would have known.
Absolutely. Knowledge is always power. I appreciate it, Stacey. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Thank you for listening to Autism Weekly. We hope you tune back in next week to learn more about autism in the real world. Autism Weekly is now found on all the major listening apps, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and more. Subscribe to be notified when we post a new podcast. Autism Weekly is produced by ABS Kids. ABS Kids is proud to provide diagnostic assessments and ABA therapy to children with developmental delays like autism spectrum disorder. You can learn more about ABS Kids and the Autism Weekly podcast by visiting abskids.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you again next week.